Hi, friends, and welcome back to Igniting Imagination. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood, and joining me is my co host for this season, the Reverend Dr. Kenda Creasy Dean. Hey,
Hey, it's
Kenda.
great to be with you again.
Yes, it is. So good to be together. So, we're back to talk with another 2024 Lock Innovative Leader. We're halfway through the season, and if you haven't heard our first two episodes, please go back and listen. They are dynamic and inspiring conversations. Listen and share with friends and colleagues, and we hope these conversations will spark the spirit within you. Speaking of which, Kenda, I'm thinking about your most recent book, Innovating for Love. And I'd love to hear you talk about what drove you to write it in the first place. Like what compelled you? What came up inside you?
Well, I mean, the technical answer to that is I was asked to be part of this book series that for it was curriculum for churches and so on, which was kind of the immediate motivator. But I had been looking for kind of an opening to be able to just sort of put a stake in the sand for the way innovation is different in churches than it is in the broader
Mm,
culture. I just
yeah.
wanted I didn't want the way Christians think about doing new things to get lumped in with some of these other assumptions we have, because I do think that we're concerned with um, a different kind of innovation in the sense that what we want to do is participate in God's innovation rather than try to get God to participate in ours. You know,
Yeah.
I think that
Nice.
that kind of it's very tempting to say, God, I've got this great idea. How about if you bless it? you know, but I actually
Right.
think that we're called to do the opposite, and that puts us in a little different bucket than the kind of innovation that really stresses, have a great idea, be the
Hmm.
person with the big idea. There's a lot of pressure on that to be the person with the big idea, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I know that a lot of faith leaders feel that with this emphasis on innovation, right? They're like, well, I'm not the most innovative person I know. And what we want to be able to say is that's not actually the point not in Christian tradition anyway, right? You might be somebody that God has given the skills for being the instigator of these things. God also
Mm,
might have given you the skills to be the cheerleader for these things, or the talent scout for these things, or the encourager for these things. And because you are a faith leader, God has definitely equipped you with an appreciation for scripture to be able to tell stories about,
mm.
how these things fit into God's dream for the world. So, anyway, that's kind of it. I just wanted us to have our own version of the story out there.
Yeah. I love that. I feel like that's so important, that the distinctions, but also what is ours to do. And I mean, what are the kinds of things that you think are needed to create an environment where leaders can step into that calling, whether they're the
Yeah.
instigator or the cheerleader or the, influencer, or whatever the words are that each of us names our own gifts, but what's needed to cultivate an environment where we can catalyze those courageous leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in some ways, I think part of it means that we need to rethink our understanding of what a faith leader's job is, you know,
Mhm.
whether, to be the person who is called to inspire and equip and to champion someone is different from being the person who's called to do ministry to people.
Do ministry
Yeah, and
to
which I
people.
feel is kind of a trap we
Yeah.
fall into. I
Right.
also think that we've got to figure out a way to rid ourselves of this notion that we're in a culture of scarcity. There's
Mhm.
nothing that is more antithetical to the gospel than the culture of scarcity. God's
Yeah.
abundance, God's effusive, never-ending love, the grace that
Mhm.
goes before us before you even ask for it. All of that stuff just screams abundance, but we have allowed ourselves to be trapped in a narrative of scarcity. I just think that's gotta go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, what a great setup for our guest
Yeah,
today. I mean, we didn't
no, we
plan
didn't.
that, but it's so our guest today is 2024 Lock Innovative leader, Jonathan Brooks. And Jonathan is a lifelong resident of Chicago, Illinois, and he currently serves as lead pastor at Lawndale Christian Community Church in the North Lawndale neighborhood. Pastah
Yep.
J, as he is affectionately called, is a sought after speaker, writer, artist, community activist. He's contributed to numerous blogs, articles, books, and recently released his book, Church Forsaken: Practicing Presence in Neglected Neighborhoods. Jonathan has a Bachelor of Architecture from Tuskegee University, Master of Arts in Teaching from National Louis University, and Master of Divinity from Northern Seminary with an emphasis in Christian community development. You can learn more at pastaj.com. So, Kenda, what stood out for you in our conversation with Pastah J?
Oh, what a dynamic conversation this is. I love talking with him just because I'm so inspired by the example that he sets and the stories he can tell. I think it was really important that he talked about how the fact that he didn't decide to be an innovator. His church didn't decide
Mhm.
to be innovative. What they decided was to listen more to their neighbors and to be
Yeah.
closer to their neighbors. And it's out of that that these kind of innovative moves began to emerge, which is such an important we forget that all the time, right? The goal is not to innovate. Innovate's what you do in response to loving the people that you're with. And
Yes,
I just
yes. Somebody said that some
well, anyway, I mean,
It's so
it's not
good.
original, right? People like Jonathan have been practicing it for a lot of years. And I think another important part of this interview is his conversation about comfort. He distinguishes between the
Yeah.
comforter and comfort. And he even
Mm,
cites somebody who talks about comfort as the enemy because he's trying to destroy saviorism, as he calls it,
yes,
and
right.
get it out of this. And this is related, right, to the whole innovation conversation that we just had. The idea is not to innovate. The idea is not to be the savior. That job's already taken. You know, the
Mhm.
job is to participate in what God is doing, and he feels that comfort gets in the way of that a lot. We're not willing to take the risks that we would take if we trusted God to send the comforter to us. Anyway, that was
Yes.
interesting to me. There's a lot.
Yes, yes. There's so much, so many great things to pull on. He quotes, I think it's Benjamin Mays, but it's this
Mm,
beautiful, "The love of God and love of humanity is
one love,
one
yeah.
love." And he embodies that. Boy, does he embody that. And this is so good. So let's listen to our conversation with Pastor Jay. Pastor Jay, thank you for being with us again today. So excited.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I really am excited.
So, you have a long history of an asset-based community development approach to ministry. I mean, like, you were doing this before people were talking about it and it was all the thing, right? You've been doing this for a long time. So take us back to your time in the Englewood neighborhood in Chicago where you pastored Canaan Community Church, and tell us the story of your investment in that community and what happened during your 15-year tenure.
Well, I am thankful for the opportunity to share a little bit about my journey in Englewood and how I landed at asset-based community development. And I'm really thankful that it's becoming kind of a philosophy that people are engaging with and understanding that, real transformation does begin with the assets in a community, not just looking at the deficits,
Mm.
so that we become people who can join in to what God is doing in the neighborhood versus thinking we're coming in to fix and save things. So my journey begins in Englewood as a young child, as a young boy, born and raised in Englewood on the south side of
Mm,
Chicago. I describe Englewood as a neighborhood that you drive through, but very rarely drive to. Um,
mm,
so that means that the kind of young people and folks that end up in communities like that are those who see it as a place to escape rather than a place to invest. So no one says, when I grow up, I want to still be living in this neighborhood, doing the same things I'm doing. The
wow.
expectation is upward mobility, moving away, getting out. All of those are signs of success. I was no different. Made a decision I was going to get out by any means necessary. Ended up trying the education path and went away to college with the hopes of not returning all the way to Alabama. I went to Tuskegee University to study architecture.
Mm.
And I loved it.
Architecture, of course.
It
Yeah.
makes sense, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. God has a long way to get to the same path often, but yeah, so found myself back in Englewood after a short stint in architecture and not really enjoying the field as much as I enjoyed like the art and the like the
Mm.
process of architecture. The field was a little more cutthroat and a little less loving than I expected it to be. And so
Mm.
I stepped out of that and found myself actually as a substitute teacher back home in Englewood as a
Wow.
substitute teacher at a local elementary school. And it was so interesting. You know, my mom had taught school for almost 40 years. I told myself I'd never be a school teacher. Here I was falling in love with teaching school and loving kids in my own neighborhood.
Mm.
But I also
Mm.
started working in ministry at the local church where my mom was going as well when I came back and started working with youth. So I found myself being a youth ministry leader at this church in Englewood, living in Englewood, back in my mom's house, and then now substitute teaching at this local elementary school, which eventually turned into a full-time position where I was an art teacher at this school. Then I became eventually the youth pastor at this church, and then now I'm living in the neighborhood. I end up getting married, all these things, and it's just like my life started to revolve around Englewood. And whereas I was trying to get away, it seemed like God was moving me
Mm.
deeper in the community versus taking me away. And it was in those moments that I started realizing maybe that I had it all wrong, that
Mm.
it wasn't about escaping, and it wasn't about moving up and moving away. It was about moving in
Mm.
and moving closer to the people that were there and to see what God was actually doing in a community that I thought I knew. So yeah, through a crazy turn of events, after being back home from college and youth pastoring for about 3 or 4 years, I suddenly was thrust into the lead pastor position at Canaan. That time, Canaan Missionary Baptist Church.
Mm.
And let's just say that our church wasn't really thinking about community work as a central part of its ministry, right? We were a typical kind of Black Baptist church that was just kind of like everybody dressed up in nice clothes and came to church on Sunday and kind of held this ethos of what, African American church has been for many, many years. So it was tied to the community, but not tied to the community in the way that eventually we saw it evolve into. Tied in the community because it was a Black neighborhood and a Black church. And so we wanted to lift up African American history and culture and the way that African American church was kind of run. But the people who went to the church didn't necessarily live in the community anymore, right? There was a distance
Oh. Mhm.
between those who were in the community and those who were coming to visit it to go to church on Sunday and then drive back somewhere else. Initially, what I just kind of realized was God was leading me to be in that community, right? Like to be a resident, to reside there, for it to be home. And my wife and I were still trying to battle, and my wife wasn't from Englewood, and I was trying to get her to realize I feel like this is what we're supposed to do. And it was a bit of a battle for us to make the decision. But eventually she came with me. And I think it was because um, she loved me, and because I think that God is very real, and was able to convince
Mm.
her in ways that I
Mm.
could not. But as I became the pastor of Canaan, as I was living in the neighborhood, I was still teaching school as a Bible vocational pastor
Mm.
in the neighborhood. Now, having our first child, I'm raising kids in this same neighborhood. It became very clear to me that as a pastor of this church, um, that my responsibility was to help my church realize that God didn't just call us to love our neighbor, but it turns out that God called us to love our neighborhood as well.
Mm.
And that led to some very different ways of doing ministry, not things I would have ever thought about when I started pastoring. But we moved in this transition from being this kind of transient church to me really preaching that, hey, this is a place to live, a place to invest, and we need to come closer. And over the years, seeing people begin to catch hold of that vision and start moving back into the neighborhood, and people from the community, because they found a church that actually cared about the community, starting to come and saying, "Man, I never really went to church before, but I like what I see here, and I like what you guys are doing and how you seem to be concerned about our community. And ministries I never would have thought were coming. You know, I grew up in traditional church, you know, with ushers and deacons and choir members, and those were the ministries. But we ended up doing stuff like, you know, reduction programs in partnership with Cook County Juvenile Development, Cook County Juvenile Court Systems. And then we worked with Angels of Hope, which was an organization that worked with those who have been caught up in Cook County prison, but we would go visit their families every week and bring boxes of food and sit and talk with them and laugh and try to build a relationship so that when their loved one came out, they would have a loving, godly home to come back to. And we
Mm.
started doing stuff like after school programs and partnering with our local public schools and partnering with the resident association of Greater Englewood and eventually led to a campaign where we were the center of it called the Englewood Rising campaign that we'll get into later. But like I never would have imagined that our little church on the corner there, 55th and Paulina, would have been so engaged in so much ministry. And it wasn't because we had some great vision and plan. It was because we decided to come closer to our neighbors, to listen
Mm.
well, and to
Mhm.
allow them to lead us into ministry. So that's just the beginning story. I mean, it goes deeper, you know, because there's some other things that happen, but um, you know, I'll start there, and then if there's more you want to ask, I'm ready to answer it. So
Well, wonderful. I love hearing the history and your own rootedness in that community. You didn't just come from the outside. I mean, it's like God grew you up for this. I mean, it's really quite beautiful. And in our research, we found that you organized bringing in Whole Foods to Englewood. Is that
Yeah.
right? And tell us the story of that and
absolutely.
why that was important.
Absolutely. What a story. What a story.
Yeah.
So I talked a little bit about the Englewood Rising campaign.
Mhm.
And what that was our community decided to do its own rebranding campaign.
Huh.
Because what was happening was, even though we were seeing all the amazing, resilient ways that our neighborhood was flourishing, it seemed like all of the media attention and all of the information, you searched Englewood on Google and it was nothing but negativity. We wanted to grab hold of those reins and rebrand our communities ourselves. And so we started hashtag Englewood Rising. And if you want to look that up online, you still can. Hashtag Englewood with an E, ENGLEWOOD Rising.
Nice.
And the other one was hashtag good in Englewood. And the goal was to get people to see all of the amazing people, organizations, churches, you know, families that were in our neighborhood, just doing life in ways that
Mm,
were not being magnified in the media. One of the things that came out of that was this growing desire for us to take the reins of providing what we wanted to see in our communities. So
mm,
in 2000 and what was it, about 2011 or so, we started working on what's called the quality of life plan in our neighborhood. And that was what we wanted to see in our own community in the next 5 years. So we got a lot of community leaders, residents, others together to create this quality of life plan and say, what do we want to see in our neighborhood in the next 5 years? And there were lots of things on there. We talked about improved schools, park restructuring, opening up some closed down public transportation sites that were in our community, other things. But one of the main ones was there was a large corridor that we kind of call the downtown area of Englewood. And at one point, 63rd Street in Halsted was the second largest commercial district in Chicago to the Magnificent Mile. That's how much commerce and merchandise was flowing through there. And what anchored it was there was a large grocery store right on the corner of 63rd and Halsted, but it had been torn down and closed for 50 years. There was nothing there,
mm,
huge vacant lot. And in that quality of life plan, we said we want to see a healthy food store, grocery store, anchoring our community on the corner of 63rd and Halsted.
Wow.
And that started
Yeah.
in the quality of life plan. Well, once you start putting things out in the atmosphere, people start working and saying, how do we get this done? You just never know how you're going to be involved in that type of thing. I mean, I was at the meetings and I'm like, I don't know how to open a grocery store. I got a little architecture background if you guys need some advice, but I don't, you know. But I'll tell you how it really happened. Our church started what's called the Five Loaves Food Cooperative. It was a partnership with Trader Joe's grocery store. And so what we would do is we would go when Trader Joe's was closed, and we would pick up food from them that was like close to its, expiration date or best if sold by date, and we would bring it back to our church, and then people would shop in our church at $1 a piece in cooperative style, and all we did was kind of pay for the gas and things for different families to go back to the store, pick it up, and bring it. So we did that every week for about a couple of years, and then it grew to Trader Joe started saying, "Wow, y'all keep coming back. There must be a market there for something." And we said there is. So we started bringing the dollars that we were getting from the people and bringing it to Trader Joe's and saying, "Well, when we pick up this stuff, would you give us an opportunity to shop for some things with this money that we've pulled together?" And they were like, "Absolutely." So during after hours, we would pick up the food that was best if sold date, but then go in the store and shop for the things that people asked for and bring it back to the church.
Huh.
That co-op began to blow up. I mean, it became a big thing. Lots of people were traveling all over Englewood to come to it because many people were saying, "Why take 2 or 3 buses to go all the way downtown
Yeah.
when the food's right here? I can just come to my neighborhood." And our own power was what was allowing that to happen. It was through that I think we really get to this story of Whole Foods, because we opened up that co-op, and then people started saying, "We don't even have a sit-down restaurant in our neighborhood." And so we started working together with the Resident Association of Greater Englewood, other organizations, other individuals, and a young man that went to our church named Phil Sipka helped us open up a cafe called the Kusanya Cafe.
Huh.
Kusanya is a Swahili word that means to gather together, right? So it was this
Mm.
whole idea of we can provide for ourselves. We don't need to wait for somebody on the outside. We need for Starbucks to make a decision that it wants to come put a coffee shop here. We can do that. And we did. And so we're celebrating 11 years this year of the Kusanya Cafe. But
Huh.
that's when the thing becomes contagious because people started going, "What if we could do a co-op of our own? If we could do a cafe of our own, why don't we have a grocery store?" And what we realized was there were so many people with gardens around. There was the Growing Home, which had the first USDA grade urban farm in the city of Chicago, was right in Englewood, right? There were all of these things that we didn't recognize. One day, this is the part of the story that kind of gets kind of crazy, y'all. Walter Rock, who was the then CEO of Whole Foods, actually calls my phone. Now, I don't know who he is. I don't know much about Whole Foods. I don't know anything about Walter Robb. But he just, "Hello, is this Pastor Jonathan Brooks?" "Yes, it is. My name is Walter Robb. I'm the CEO of Whole Foods, and I wanted to talk with you." And I thought it was a joke. I was like, "Whole Foods, what, like the store?" He's like, "Yeah, the grocery store." "Why do you want to talk to me?" He says, "Well, I've heard about your little co-op that you have at your church. And I'm interested in, talking about like how people are coming to it, what are they buying, what kind of things." And I was like, "Oh, okay, no problem." Now, I start talking to him about, the fact that people learn the difference between a kumquat and a pomegranate now. People are learning how to make eggplant parmesan right over here in our little neighborhood. And he's like, "Wow, really? Do you think there will be a market for a Whole Foods?" Now, I didn't know much about Whole Foods, but I said, "From what I've heard, I think people may want the food, but they don't want the prices, brother." That's all I said to him. He said, "Well, can we come there and meet some people and see if we can do it?" So what I found out was a good friend of mine, David Doig, who is the director of an organization called Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, had given him my phone number and said, "If you really want to get into Englewood and you're thinking about it, you need to meet Jonathan because he knows everybody there. He is embedded in the community." So it wasn't my knowledge about grocery stores. It wasn't my great, charm or anything. It was the fact that I was rooted and that people knew me and trusted me,
Yeah.
that he was told
Yeah.
that. And from there, this story just became incredible. So just to wrap it up really quick, we had about 50 community meetings in the neighborhood where people came to do everything from figure out the floor plan of the store, what we would want to have in it, what kind of artwork would be on the walls, whose
Oh,
actual items would be
gosh.
sold in the store. We asked for local residents to be able to share and sell their items in the store. Everything from Miss Kimmy's Cakes to Uncle Earl's Gourmet Rolls to Jimmy's
Huh.
Vegan Cookies, all the
Wow.
people. And they did. And ultimately, our last ask was on the staples. We know that Whole Foods is a specialty store, right? And there's lots of things in there that you don't buy every day. But the things you do, egg, milk, bread, and we want a hot food. Could that be affordable? Could it be commiserate to what we see around us? And they did. And so they lowered the prices on their staples in the store for us to be able to afford it and accepted public food stamps as well. So it became a big deal.
Wow.
So the
It is a
Whole
big
Foods
deal.
opened up about a year later to fanfare. It was Englewood Whole Foods, said Englewood everywhere, little black kids on the walls eating apples painted by local artists. And that day when the mayor came to cut the ribbon and all the officials were there, we were waiting for them to get done so we could open this thing up Grand Englewood style because it was our store. We had a barbecue in the parking lot with grills going, people serving ribs and food, the DJ going, and us doing the Cupid shuffle in the lot. And it was beautiful. And it was a moment where I
Oh my
realized
gosh.
that when people have ownership of
Yeah.
what they feel they
Yeah.
deserve, their God-given rights, then they don't just look at it as, oh, somebody's going to play something here. They say, no, we are going to step up and be a part of what happens in
Yeah.
what's built in our own community. So it's a great story. There's lots more to it since then, but it also attracted Starbucks and Chipotle. So what I talk about now, waiting on,
Yeah.
they came along with Whole Foods in that
Yeah.
community. Yep.
It's incredible. I gotta ask, I mean, not only do you create, a church community, you just plain old create a community. And the investment and the pride that goes with that, and you up and left. So now you're at Lawndale with a whole different can of worms. How did you translate the those kind of community skills that you have as a pastor into your newish pastoral placement in Lawndale? And what I'm wondering is, how are you reimagining for the rest of us what pastoral ministry entails, what it involves?
Thank you, Kendra. It's really interesting. Lots of people, I get the question all the time about, so you're on the west side of the city now, which is a big dichotomy in Chicago. South side and west side are two of the most kind of marginalized sides of town in Chicago. It's where most of the people of color in our communities live, most of the folks who are on the lower economic status. But they're also the most beautiful places to live, in my
Mm,
opinion.
mm,
That's where you find the most community. That's where you find the people looking out for each other. That's where you find real resiliency. And so what tends to happen is neighborhoods like that often are fighting and scraping for resources, though. And so one side thinks one
mm,
side's doing better than the other side and all that. And what I felt as I was even making the decision to come to Lawndale was that God was giving me a greater call, which was to help us realize that it's not about fighting over scraps. It's about recognizing that if we could work together,
uh,
what a magnificent transformation could be done in the city of Chicago. And I'm watching that come to fruition
yeah.
now. And I think that goes into your question of like pastoral ministry. I think we've got to recognize that pastoral ministry is all about caring about people. Pastoring is shepherding, it is caring about
Mm,
people in their holistic way. So, yes, spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, financially, every single part of a person's life becomes important. And so, the ministry that we lead them into and the ministry that we should be kind of championing as
mhm,
pastors is ministry that helps people to thrive and flourish holistically, right?
mm,
And that means that we're going to do more than preach sermons. That means we're going to do more than help people memorize scripture. It means we're going to help people apply the kingdom values in their life in a way that makes the neighborhood a better place to be. Jesus never went anywhere and people weren't like, he made it better when he was around here, right? Like, you know what I mean? Nobody said Jesus left and it was worse when he came, right? He made it better. Now, there might be some people who said it worse because they didn't like what he was doing, but that's a different kind of conversation.
Yeah.
I think what we've got to do is be able to say, you know, um, no matter where we are. So I can transplant all of the values, all of the things I've learned in Englewood right over here to North Lawndale, where I am, and continue a legacy that's been going on here for 45 years and feel like nothing's really shifted for me.
Mhm.
And that's what it feels
Mm,
like, right? I tell people I'm doing the exact same work to a different magnitude with, with a place that's been here longer, with a few more resources because of how long we've been here, but an opportunity to share those resources with others in the city in ways that I wasn't able to do previously. So I love it.
just one more follow-up is, do you think, I'm wondering about what the actual innovation is here, right? Is the innovation bringing in Whole Foods in a way that, is owned by the community, or feels owned by the community? Or is the innovation your vision of being embedded in the community? I mean,
Hmm.
Mm,
what is the new thing God is doing?
yeah, absolutely. That question is much easier for me to answer. The new thing that God is doing is destroying saviorism. It is
Huh,
clear to me, right? Like it
Wow.
is helping us to realize that God has been at work in these communities forever. God
Yeah.
has always been there,
uh,
always working, always ready to have these places flourish. The problem is that God's people have been abandoning them for decades. We've been running to
Mm.
places that we feel are safe, that we feel are good, that we feel are healthy, a place where I can raise my children, they can get the best schools, that I can have a nice restaurant and a nice versus saying, I'd like to be a part of a place where I can help the schools by being a part of them, where I can help to plant a small restaurant, where I can be a part of creating the life that I would like to see all people have, versus waiting for someone to create it for me so that I can be comfortable. Comfort is the enemy of kingdom values. It is the
mm,
enemy.
Mm.
We have got to stop trying to be comfortable and really recognize that God said, I will never make you comfortable, but I will send you a comforter in
mhm,
the midst of the uncomfortable. And so I think that is the innovation here. The innovation is let's move closer to the work that God has us to do rather than closer to the comfortability that we've been seeking for years, as Christians especially.
great.
Ah.
Man.
Yes, yes, yes. So this feels really important, Jonathan, because looking from the outside, one could interpret that the work that you did at Englewood was so grassroots and kind of new for that community and really moved the needle on that community. And then you moved to Lawndale, that was much more established in its asset based and community health and well being kind of tools and communities. I had the opportunity to be with you in North Lawndale and to see what Lawndale Community Church is doing and walk those streets and experience the incredible healthcare and just holistic ways that the church has impacted that whole community. But really, that whole community has developed. So it's not even the church impacting; it's just sort of that way that the community has really grown into itself. And okay, so one could say, oh, now you're at Lawndale, like you've arrived in this already kind of very developed. But what you're saying is very different. You're saying, no, no, no. It's not about being comfortable or having arrived at all. It's actually the way that the Holy Spirit is moving and using you, and the way that you show up in a kind of listening posture and neighbor, like being a neighbor and helping or being a part of a conversation that says, how do we be who God is asking us to be and calling us to be with each other together? And that is an ongoing, always kingdom building work for all of us. And do you hear the difference here? What I'm saying, one could look and say, you've kind of arrived at this spot where you're just going to keep,
Mhm.
Lawndale being Lawndale and this amazing work that's happened. But no, you're like saying, okay, God is always doing a new thing, and how are we going to be a part of it? So um, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about what that means for where you are now, what that means for your own leadership, but also what it means for North Lawndale. What are the next big dreams? What's happening in this space? It was a
Absolutely.
long way to get
Absolutely.
to that question, but
No, I love it. I love that. I mean, I do want to echo that sentiment though, just so the listeners don't miss it. There is a slight nuance between um, being in a community and being with a community. And I
Yeah.
think that's the
mm,
nuance that you were describing.
mm,
There are lots of churches in this neighborhood. There are lots of community organizations in this neighborhood. but they do things that are primarily either one way. They're either just here and they're just, this is where our building is, or this is where our name says we should be, or whatever. Or they're doing things for the community, right? Like, hey, we'll have a closed closet on this day at this time. If you can make it, you are welcome to come to our thing that we do for you, right?
Mhm.
We have a food pantry that's open from this time to this time for you. Come when we're available to help you. But what you're very, very, very eloquently pronounced it is, we are moving from that to with. And what we're saying is we don't want to do anything without the community's involvement. So even things like closed closets don't happen unless the community says, this is what we want to do. This is the best time for those of us in the community to come together. We can all bring all of our clothing together and share with one another. There's no one doing for anyone else. We're all doing it with each other. And there's a very clear distinction between saying that you're doing something with someone and doing it for them. You know, I can say that I want to do ministry for, or I can say I want to do ministry with. I want to serve my community, or I want to serve with my community. Those are very different statements. And what I've learned about Lawndale here is the difference between the way this ministry finds itself now and the way it started is that it started completely with, right? And what happens over time is that even if a community, that's their DNA, because things are happening and they're happening at a more rapid rate, people begin to think that you're doing things for them. They start saying,
Mm.
you're providing healthcare for us. You're building homes in the community. You provide a fitness gym for us. You provide. And what I'm trying to remind us is none of that happens without you, right? Without you participating.
Mhm.
We are a community taking care of ourselves, which means that the dreams that come from this are dreams that move us down the spectrum everywhere we go. And what do I mean by that? We started off just trying to make people's lives better. We just want betterment, right? Like you have trouble getting something to eat, we want to make it easier. We have a Luminitis Pizzeria, Green Tomato Cafe, you know, all these different things in our in our stretch that we want to make it a better place for you to be in. But then you use the word. Not only do we want to be better, we want to develop, right? So we want to see like actual transformation happen in our neighborhood to the point to where vacant lots are new affordable homes, where people who find themselves getting caught up in the legal system now have high quality legal care that keeps them from taking
Mm.
plea deals, right? That gets them locked up for things that they should never be locked up for. These are development activities and they are great. But ultimately, what we want to see, and this is what the dreams are for North Lawndale now, is that the systems that create a place where someone could go to prison for something that doesn't they've never even done because they don't have adequate legal care, that we need to eradicate, right? The systems
Mm.
that cause people to have overwhelming rates of diabetes, obesity, heart issues, all those because of what's produced in their neighborhoods and what they've been trained to eat or not to eat, the lack of physical places to do physical exercise, like those things are systemic issues that we need to get to the root of as well. So we're moving from betterment to development to systemic change because that's what
Mm.
our community needs. That's what the people are asking for. So as I step into this role, it's one thing for people to be able to get a nice place to live. It's another thing to be able to say, I am going to lobby and fight with the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, and Cook County to make sure that there are all of these city-owned vacant land in our city, in our county-owned vacant land that they're just letting sitting there do nothing, get flipped and turned into homes for people who've been living in our community all these years and have not had access to home ownership. That is a next step that our neighbors have to do together. So right now we have a campaign called the Reclaiming Chicago campaign. And we're trying to bring
Mm.
people who've been living in our neighborhood for 30, 40 years, renting, trying to figure it out. We're trying to bring affordable home ownership to them. That is how you sustain a neighborhood and bring flourishing to everyone. But I got to lobby the city. I got to lobby the county. I got to sit at tables at City Hall in Springfield, Illinois, in order for those things to happen. So we're moving from just talking on the phone to people about Whole Foods to now sitting in front of
Mhm.
officials with our neighbors right there with us saying, this is what we deserve. And
Mm.
this is what I see for the
Yeah.
next for Lawndale. We move into systemic change.
Yeah, I love that you're moving upstream. You know, you're meeting needs, yes, every day, and really helping the community own their own power and agency and voice and giftedness. And now you're moving upstream to systemic issues, and that's fabulous. As we kind of wrap up our conversation, I'm going to ask you a question, then, and Kenda's going to do some rapid fire questions, if you will. But Kenda, in her book, talks about the fact that we don't innovate for innovation's sake; we innovate for love.
Mm.
And I'm wondering what that means for you related to your ministry.
I want to snap first. I love that quote. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness, you
yeah,
said
yeah.
it with love. Yes, yes, yes. One of my favorite sayings, actually is was a quote by Benjamin Mays, who was the president of Morehouse College for many years. And one of my favorite quote is how I do my email signature. If you've ever got an email from me, the quote says, "The love of God
Mhm.
and love of humanity is one love."
And love.
And so I
Mm.
sign off on my emails with one love, because I want people to recognize that really what Benjamin Mays is saying is that if we'll pay attention to the great commandment, it will lead us to innovation. Jesus is very, very clear. When they ask what's the most important thing you can be doing, he says simply, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two things do all the law and the prophets hang. If we can do that, if we can fall in love with God and fall in love with the people and places around us, we will innovate, right? Because you won't.
Mm.
Love leads to innovation. That's what happens. And that's what Jesus was telling us by leading us to the great commandment. That's why on every building, every place you go in Lawndale, you see this phrase, loving God, loving people, because the love of God and the love of humanity is one love. And so, Kenda, I say we don't innovate because we want to be getting awards and all these other things. We innovate because we've been loved and because we love. And if you will follow that path of love, I guarantee you it will lead you to trying things you never thought you would try, doing things you never thought you would do, going places you never thought you would go, and meeting people you never thought you would meet.
Mm. Gosh, I feel like we could just end there, but my job is to throw some rapid fire questions at you. So let's do it. And you actually might have just mentioned the first in a historical way. Um, who's a mentor you want to shout out to that's been influential in getting you where you've been in ministry?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Real quickly, being a part of the Christian Community Development Association, I got to shout out Dr. John Perkins,
Mm,
Dr. Wayne Gordon, those guys who helped start the Christian Community Development Association, and all of my CCDA family. There are hundreds, thousands of people who have poured into me by me getting to visit their neighborhoods, learning them. All my family at Parish Collective in the same way, Tim and all those guys over there, and just anybody doing real work on the ground. But one that I really got to shout out is my wife, Michelle. None of the work that I've been able to do, none of the work we've been able to do in our community, especially around like the healthy food and food equity stuff, that's really my wife's lane. And she's the one who first put my hands in some soil and told me that I needed to heal myself of the trauma of all the images that I had seen of African Americans connected to soil were connected to enslavement. She
wow.
freed me from that by making me put my hands in the soil and saying, reconnect to that, Jonathan, because until
Huh,
you do, you'll always have this trauma that you'll be fighting against. So shout out to my
wow.
Michelle. I love her for walking with me through some of that, and now, man, I feel not only Pastor J, sometimes I'm Farmer J. I love being in the soil and growing things. So
That's incredible. And is there a spiritual practice that kind of keeps you alive in all this?
I'll tell you one that's been like renewing me lately in the last 2 or 3 years. It's Sabbath. It is Sabbath.
Mm.
I will man, please don't follow my lead on this one. The first 15 years of ministry, I don't know what the Sabbath was, man. I was working every day, doing everything I could. And the last 3 or 4 years post COVID, I have really taken Sabbath seriously. And it has been so refreshing. You know what it does, Kendra? It helps you to stop taking yourself so seriously, right? The world doesn't stop. Things don't fall apart or break down because you took a break. And it helped me really realize what God was doing when He instituted Sabbath. God was
Mm,
saying, this is for you. And you need to stop thinking that the world needs you and realize what a privilege it is that you get to participate in what I'm doing in the world.
Oh, that's incredible. Okay, last one is so, I teach a bunch of seminary students, and so let's say one of them, and a lot of them do, would like to be a pastor the way Jonathan Brooks is a pastor. I want to be able to transform a community the way you have helped in God's transformation of Englewood and
Mm.
um, Lawndale. What's the first step?
Reside, reside,
Yeah.
reside. And I'll even add an extra line. This is from my book. Reside where you don't want to be. A
Mm.
lot of times we want to live, reside, set up presence, but we say, God, I'll go, I'll do whatever you want me to do, when you want me to do it, how you want me to do it, but let me decide where I'm gonna go. I think the number one question we need to ask ourselves is, where does God want us? And that might be a place that we would never choose to go.
Yeah.
Because practicing
Mm.
presence is not always exciting, but it's always active.
Hmm.
Even in the mundane, everyday activities of life, you have to weave yourself into the fabric of your place. Begin by falling in love with your
Mm.
place,
Hmm.
ever that may be. Don't look for
Yeah.
some exotic place. Don't look for my place. Wherever God has you, weave yourself into fabric of that place right now.
Yeah, that's beautiful. We've been asking all of our guests one question, and that is, what is an old thing that you see passing away
Mm.
or that ought to pass away? And what is a new thing that you see God in the middle of revealing? You've already mentioned that a little bit,
Yep, yep.
but I give you one more shot at
Absolutely. It is, I'm a broken record when it comes to this one. Saviorism has to go. Doing
Mm.
for and thinking that we are God's gift
Yeah.
to any place has to go. We need to not consider it
yeah.
anymore. When we look at the incarnation of Christ and Jesus coming down in John 14 and dwelling amongst us, it is not for him to be for us to mimic Jesus in that story, right? I tell time, anytime you read the Bible and you see Jesus in the story and you automatically align yourself to Jesus in the story, you're probably reading that story
That's
incorrectly.
so true.
So incarnation is
Yeah.
not about us coming into the neighborhood to be the saviors. Actually, we ourselves are the problem. And so this
Mm.
this is this is really my line that leads to what I think God is doing new. If we are to take incarnational theology true and believe that we are supposed to come move closer and be a part of our communities, we don't come as saviors, we come as sinners. We come as those who need to repent for our
Mm.
complicity in the systems and structures that have made what we
Mhm.
say we're coming to repair. And so we don't
Yeah.
come as messiahs, we come as repentant ministers who say, God, help me to reconcile and make right things that I have allowed to happen. And so repentance becomes our actual activity. So I always say saviorism has to go, and prophetic repair is now what God is doing that's new. And
Mm.
we've got to ask ourselves, what does that look like? What does it look like to come and repair the things that have been broken? This is why my tagline in my book is practicing presence in neglected neighborhoods.
Mm.
There have been some clear decisions made that have caused some neighborhoods to look the way they do and others to look the way they do. How do we come in and become repairers of the breach?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Beautiful. And as always, whenever I'm with you, Jonathan, I am inspired and moved and challenged and encouraged.
Mm.
You are amazing and so grateful for this time. Thanks for being with us.
Bless you. Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.